Ni howdy, y'all. I'm Sohan. We're here with another episode of Gong Fu Tea Cha, and today we are going to talk about Hóngchá, aka red tea, also known in the West as black tea. What's the deal with that? Well, it's a little complicated, but first let's talk about what it is. Black tea, aka Hóngchá, aka red tea, is the most oxidized form of tea. In China, you've got green tea, and you've got oolong tea, and you have Hóngchá, and you have white tea, and they're all the same plant. And that's pretty essential, important fact about tea, is that tea is the one plant. And if you have that tea in its unoxidized form, that leaf in its completely unoxidized form, that's what we call green tea. If you have it in its partially oxidized form, that's what we call oolong tea. And when it's fully oxidized, the Chinese call that Hóngchá, and it means red tea. Why is it called red tea? Well, as we're gonna see in just a second, when you steep this tea, it makes a beautiful red liquor. And that is where it got its name. And that red color is caused by the oxidation of the tea chemicals. A lot of the catechins in the tea, the antioxidant chemicals in the tea, get oxidized. And that's a natural process that happens because an enzyme in the tea called polyphenol oxidase catalyzes the oxidation of those chemicals. And that leaves the tea with that red color of the liquor, that dark black color of the leaf, and that flavor that we associate with black tea, and which is that kind of mellow, richer, darker flavor compared with the lighter, more floral, and slightly astringent taste of green tea. And so that's what it is. It's fully oxidized tea. It's on the full oxidation end of the tea spectrum. Why do we call it black tea? We know why the Chinese call it Hóngchá. They call it Hóngchá because of the color. And I'm gonna do it right now. I'm gonna show you all that color with this rinse. There we go. So there on this, even on this rinse, it's starting to open up, but you do get this beautiful red color of this tea. There you go, Hóngchá red tea. That's why we call it that. So in the West, we call it black tea. Why? Because the Europeans, when they first started getting tea, did not know that tea was one plant, that very important fact about tea that we just discussed, tea being the single plant. I'm just gonna rinse everything out. And so they would get these different leaves from China. They'd get green ones, and they'd get dark ones, and so they called the green ones green tea, and they called the black ones black tea. But they did not realize it was all one plant, Camellia sinensis, because the Chinese were very secretive about tea and silk and a whole bunch of other things that they exported to the West back in the day. Why don't we start calling it red tea here in the West? It's complicated because there's another plant that gets called red tea in the West that's not actually tea, and it's not even related to tea, but it gets called red tea, and that is rooibos from Africa. It's a lovely plant. It is not tea. It is kind of reddish. It's not tea. So we can't just start calling Hóngchá red tea here in the West because people would be confused and they'd think it was rooibos. Also, it's worth mentioning that in China, they can't start calling their thing black tea, which they wouldn't do, but even if we're just hypothetically, there's another category of tea called chA, which means unambiguously black tea in Chinese. And that category of tea is not necessarily oxidized, what is oxidized, but its distinguishing factor is not that it's oxidized, it's that it's fermented. And so you do have a red tea in the West that is not tea at all. You have a black tea in China that is actually black, but is not this. It is not the oxidized tea that we call Hóngchá. So it's a confusing world. Tea's confusing, and that's why we're here doing Gong Fu Tea Cha, getting through it, understanding, having fun, learning about tea, and all of its confusing inconsistencies. I'm gonna go ahead and actually steep this one now. So we talk about the history of tea. We talk about the history of black tea, of Hóngchá. You go back to the Wuyi Mountains about 600 years ago, during the Ming Dynasty, in a little narrow pass through the mountains called Tongmuguan. The Wuyi Mountains are in Fujian, the southeasternmost province of China, and they're actually the home of oolongs as well as Hóngchá, so two real important oxidized tea varieties come from there, so we owe a great debt to the farmers of the Wuyi Mountains And the first Hóngchá is called Zhengshan Xiaozhong, and it comes from that little Tongmu Pass in the Wui Mountains where the farmers were harvesting their tea, and they were interrupted by a passing militia, which if a militia comes through your place, you gotta get out of there because they're up to no good. And so the farmers were harvesting their tea, and they had their piles of freshly harvested tea leaves on mats on the ground, and they were getting ready to go home and finish it by cooking it in a wok over fire and then dry it with charcoal, which is how you make green tea, which is what they were gonna make at the time. That's all anyone ever made at the time, is what people know how to make. So they're gonna take their tea and bring it home. They got interrupted by the militia, and they had to leave their tea leaves overnight while the soldiers camped there. And in the morning they came back and got their tea, and it had turned from green to this brick red, brownish brick red color. And they thought, oh, wow, dang, our tea's ruined. But we don't want to waste it all, so instead of taking it home and using this very expensive charcoal to finish it, we're just gonna take this pine wood, which is all over the Wui Mountains and that we use for our campfires. We're gonna make these open fires, and we're gonna cook the tea in our woks over these fires. And they got all smoky from that cooking process, and they still taste smoky to this day because they use the same process now to make that tea, and they intentionally smoke it with pine wood. It's called Zhengshan Xiaozhong. It is the oldest Hóngchá. And as you can see, it's very typical of the Eastern Hóngchás. It has these small, twisty little black leaves. And this particular grade is not very buddy. We're gonna get to some buddier teas in a little bit. But this is the oldest Hóngchá. All Hóngchás descend from this. And so what is that? When we talk about Hóngchá and we talk about black tea, not everyone, most people have had Hóngchá at some point. If you order tea in a restaurant, iced tea in a restaurant, that's gonna be Hóngchá. No one's gonna talk about what kind of tea it is because it's just tea. It's just a regular old tea. To most people in the world, tea means Hóngchá. And that has a lot to do with the history of tea cultivation, the propagation and proliferation of tea throughout the world by the British Empire and their holdings in the Indian subcontinent. But first we're gonna drink a little bit of this because we talk about it and we make it and we look at it, and also tasting it and talking about what is Hóngchá, what does it taste like? So this is, by the way, we're making is not Xiaozhong, this is Dianhong, this is a Western black tea. We'll get to that in a little bit, but had to make something while I was talking about it. So I'm gonna give this a sniff. What am I getting on this Dianhong? I'm getting a lot of woody notes, hay, straw, a little bit of cacao-y sort of note. And then it has a very rich back of the throat flavor, what would hit your tongue on the front with a green tea and be a little bit sweet and a little bit astringent, moves back in the throat, and you get this very satisfying black tea taste that we associate with things like Earl Grey and Lipton tea and bubble tea. If you've had boba tea, then that's usually made with Hóngchá as well. And so having that very satisfying back of the throat taste is kind of one of the hallmarks of the Hóngchás, and that comes from that oxidation level. So why is Hóngchá so widespread? Why not green tea? Why don't we have green tea everywhere? Well, one of the reasons is because during the British Empire, when they were buying tea from China originally, and then they started a war with China over tea, and then they could no longer buy tea from China, which is a long story for another day. The British had to figure out somewhere else to get tea. They couldn't get tea from China anymore. They'd had Hóngchá from China, and they knew that, by this time, they knew that it was the same plant. And so when they discovered tea plants growing in India, in the Assam region of India, which was British territory at that time, they figured they could start growing their own tea in the British Empire. It didn't quite work though, because the Indian tea plants had not been bred and cultivated to be used as tea for thousands of years the way the Chinese tea plants had, and they are much more astringent and bitter in their natural state. The Assamensis plant is much more astringent and bitter. Assamica, plant, which is the one that grows in India naturally. And so they figured out that they could hybridize the two plants by taking tea plants that were stolen from China by a guy named Robert Fortune and sending them to Kew Gardens with some seedlings of the wild Assamica tea plants and hybridizing them in a greenhouse and making Camellia sinensis X Assamica, the variety of tea that is the most widespread in the world, that has been grown by the British in India and in Sri Lanka, and then in Kenya and Indonesia, and also now in Turkey and Georgia and various places all over the world. It is the most widely grown tea cultivar, is Camellia sinensis X Assamica, and we do have the British to thank for that. And it is especially well suited for making Hóngchá. Also, Hóngchá keeps well. It doesn't have anywhere to go. Green tea, if left too long, will oxidize. However, Hóngchá is already oxidized, so you don't have to worry about it. And so, because of that quality, it keeps better on a long sea voyage than green tea does, and makes it a more desirable trade commodity. And so when we do talk about the global tea trade, the modern global tea trade really focuses on this particular category of tea, Hóngchá, or red tea, the fully oxidized tea. And so I talked a little bit about the distinction between the Eastern Chinese and the Western Chinese Hóngchás, and I'll just get a little bit more into that here. What we're drinking right now is a Western Hóngchá, and because this technique originates in Tongmuguan in the Wui Mountains, Hóngchá, the practice of making Hóngchá, does originate in Eastern China, and you have a lot of famous Eastern Chinese Hóngchás, including Kimun or Chiman, which is from Anhui, and that's a really nice cacao-y kind of nutty, there, more steeping, nice beautiful red color in the steeping. Tea from Anhui, and then you have Zhengshan Xiaozhong, aka Lapsang Souchong. And I noticed the last two ones I talked about have both real Chinese names and kind of fake Britishized Chinese names, which is Kiman and Lapsang Souchong are the kind of Britishized versions of Chiman and Zhengshan Xiaozhong. And that's because these are what are called China teas, to distinguish from Chinese teas, which is like what we're always talking about here. The China teas are Chinese-grown teas that are commonly used in British tea blends, and they get their own funny little names. So when we talk about Hóngchás, because they were so widely used and continue to be widely used in the West, oftentimes they do have extra names like Kimun and Lapsang Souchong. And then there's Jinjunmei, another famous Eastern Chinese green tea, also from the Wui Mountains, a sister tea to Zhengshan Xiaozhong. And so the Eastern black teas, the Eastern Hóngchás, they have smaller little leaves, smaller twisty little leaves, little golden buds, very small golden buds, and they tend to be typified by having a kind of rich, burnt sugar, cotton candy, caramely, butterscotchy, that sort of realm of fragrances, and they tend to have a little bit of a sweet potato-y body to them, like a rich sweet potato-y kind of sugary body to them in the throat. They're really nice. And then when we talk about the Western Hóngchás, we're talking about Hóngchás from Yunnan, from Sichuan, from Guangxi, from places in the west of China where they haven't been making Hóngchá for as long of a time, because it does originate in the East. And so you have this kind of variety of Hóngchás being produced in the West from the different varieties of tea that are grown there. This one that we are drinking right now, and which is one of my favorite types of Hóngchá, is known as Dianhong, or the Yunnan red teas. Dian is an old name for the southwesternmost province of Yunnan. So now we've gone all the way from the southeasternmost province to the southwesternmost province, all the way across China to landlocked Yunnan province. And they've been making this tea there by drying it in the sun. This is Dianhong, and this particular type of Dianhong is Saigon cha, which means sun-dried tea. And they take it, they massage it, squish it around, break open the cell walls, release the enzyme polyphenol oxidase that catalyzes the oxidation of those tea chemicals, and then they dry it in the sun. They sprinkle it on some mats and they dry it in the sun just like they would with sheng pu'er. And so actually this tea, Dianhong, is processed very much like sheng pu'er, with the exception that it is not cooked. Sheng pu'er would get shaching. So Dianhong, this type of Dianhong Saigon cha, is actually completely raw. And so you can see it has big, beautiful, nice buds, big golden buds, and the leaves are much larger because they do use that pu'er varietal plant, the Dayazhong large leaf varietal plant. to grow this tea. So, what are the Western Chinese Hóngchás like? They are, well, I described them a second ago when I was tasting this one. They tend to have a lot more cacao notes or cocoa notes. You know, there's cacao, which has that nutty kind of bite to it, and then there's cocoa powder, which has that soft, puffy, chocolatey taste. We actually have another Saigon Hóngchá from Yunnan here called Cocoa Puffs, and we named it that because it really does taste a lot like Cocoa Puffs. And so you get a whole variety of flavors, and also fruitiness. There's a lot of fruitiness in a lot of the Western Chinese Hóngchás. I'd say that in general, the Western Chinese Hóngchás tend to be a little bit more broad. Their flavor profile tends to be more broad, whereas the Eastern Chinese Hóngchás have a more narrow, maybe a little bit more complex, and maybe, if not more complex, then more refined, just having a more narrow and more specific flavor profile. And I'm just gonna have another sip of this delicious tea. And how do we make Hóngchás? Focusing on how do we steep them? Hóngchás are interesting in that they are one of the most malleable categories of tea. What do I mean by that? Well, some teas have to be made in a very particular way, like especially oolongs tend to be this way. You really want to get specific with your oolong preparation parameters. White teas tend to be very specific in the way that they want to be made, the temperature and the timing and the dosage. Hóngchás are pretty flexible. They don't get very bitter. They have a little bit of that astringency to them that we associate with Hóngchá. But it's not nearly a green tea. A green tea has got to be prepared in a very particular way, as we did in the last episode. You want to be very precise and careful with your green tea preparation. Well, you want to be careful with Hóngchá preparation too. But you can kind of do stuff with them a little bit. You can kind of, if you want to get one of these like, you know, bright cherry red infusions that's kind of drying and, you know, dries your mouth out a little bit and is a little bit tart, but has that bite, kind of like the bite of raw cacao. You can do that. You can bring that. Or if you want to make a softer, more delicate, fluffier tasting tea, then you can do that as well. You can lower the dosage. You can steep it at a cooler temperature. Today I'm using this lovely Yixing teapot that I've had for very, very many years to steep this, and I only use this for Hóngchá. And so today I'm using this is a high temperature tea. I'm making that Dianhong. It likes high heat. I use a full boil on it or close to it. And this Yixing teapot holds heat well. You can also run it through a strainer. There are the bamboo or silk or glass strainers that we sometimes put over our gongdabe when we're steeping tea. I've seen people steep Hóngchá, especially a very small leaf Hóngchá, like Jinjuanmei, for example, steeps very quickly. They'll actually do as though they were doing pour over coffee. They'll just put it in the filter and they'll put it into a vessel like a gongdabe and they'll pour the water right over it and it'll just infuse as it pours through. And you get this very, very quick infusion. So Hóngchás are fun to experiment with. It's a great and very accessible category of tea that everyone's had. You've definitely had it before. Everyone has had it before. It's a great way to introduce people to the taste of tea because it is familiar, but especially when you're making very nice whole leaf Chinese or Indian or Sri Lankan or whatever Hóngchás you have, if you are taking the time and attention to make them the way that they want to be made and bringing out that full robust flavor and the color, they're every bit as complex and magical as all the other kinds of tea. And they are that, again, that fully oxidized category of tea that we know. So thank you all so much for joining us today on another episode of Gong Fu Tea chA. Please subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more great tea information. Until next time, I'm Sohan. Thank you.